The radio static cut through the Afghan night like a blade, crystal clear and terrifyingly calm. All call signs. This is Phantom Signal. Mission complete. Package delivered. Master Sergeant Jake Donovan froze in the Blackhawk's cabin, his massive frame going rigid against the vibration of rotor blades 8,000 feet above the Kunar Valley. Sweat that had nothing to do with the desert heat trickled down his shaved skull as he stared at the radio handset still clutched in his meaty fist. 15 minutes earlier, he and his 4 Delta Force teammates had shoved Staff Sergeant Sloan Mitchell out of this same aircraft door. No parachute, no rope, no chance in hell of survival. The small woman with light brown curls had discovered their side business selling base coordinates to Taliban commanders, so she had to be eliminated. Clean and simple. Except nothing about this was simple anymore. Nobody on this helicopter knew the call sign Phantom Signal. Nobody had ever heard that ice-cold female voice cutting through their encrypted frequency. And most disturbing of all, nobody could explain why the transmission came through at the exact moment they'd completed their cleanup operation. Staff Sergeant Derek Patterson, lean and wiry with nervous energy, leaned forward from his position near the door gunner. "Reaper, who the hell is that?" His voice cracked slightly through the comm system. "Reaper 6, do you copy?" The phantom voice continued using Donovan's personal call sign that only 5 people on this aircraft knew. "Your package has been delivered exactly where it needed to be. Clock starts now." In the green glow of night vision equipment, 5 hardened Delta operators exchanged glances that mixed confusion with the first taste of fear. Sloan Mitchell was dead. They'd watched her small form disappear into the black void below, arms windmilling helplessly as gravity claimed her. This story will completely change how you think about the word survival. The morning had started with deceptive calm at Forward Operating Base Warrior. Dawn light painted the Hindu Kush Mountains in shades of copper and gold, their jagged peaks rising like broken teeth against a sky so clear it seemed artificial. The base hummed with the controlled chaos of a military installation deep in hostile territory, where every sunrise brought new possibilities for violence, and every sunset counted as a small victory. Staff Sergeant Sloan Mitchell sat alone in the communications bunker, her slender fingers dancing across multiple keyboards with the fluid precision of a concert pianist. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a messy high bun, loose curls framing a face that could have graced magazine covers if not for the military-issue gray t-shirt and the intense focus in her green eyes. Natural freckles scattered across her cheeks and nose gave her an almost innocent appearance that had fooled more dangerous men than she could count. Around her, the nerve center of FOB Warrior buzzed with activity. 15 personnel maintained constant communication with patrol units, aircraft, and higher command. Radio chatter filled the air in multiple languages as operators coordinated everything from supply runs to close air support missions. But Sloan worked in her own bubble of concentration, seemingly oblivious to the chaos, while her screens displayed data streams that would have been meaningless to most observers. Lieutenant Carlos Torres, the base communications officer, approached her workstation carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing the expression of a man who'd learned to rely on someone else's expertise. At 32, Torres had seen enough combat deployments to recognize when someone possessed skills beyond their pay grade. And Sloan Mitchell consistently demonstrated abilities that made him grateful she was on their side. "Mitchell, what's the status on that signal degradation we picked up yesterday?" His voice carried the professional courtesy of an officer addressing a valued subordinate. Sloan's fingers never paused in their typing as she responded, "Fixed it around 0300 hours, sir. Turned out to be interference from a new Taliban radio setup about 12 clicks northeast. I adjusted our frequency hopping pattern to compensate." Torres nodded, accepting the technical explanation without fully understanding it. In his experience, Mitchell had an almost supernatural ability to identify and resolve communication problems that stumped far more senior personnel. He'd stopped questioning her methods and started simply trusting her results. Good work. The colonel wants full network diagnostics completed before the evening briefing. He paused, studying her screens with the fascination of someone watching a master craftsman at work. How do you always know exactly what's wrong with these systems? For the first time, Sloane looked up from her keyboards, those striking green eyes meeting his with an expression that seemed to contain depths he couldn't fathom. Experience, sir. Patterns become obvious once you know what to look for. The communications bunker's main door burst open with enough force to rattle the reinforced hinges, drawing every head in the room toward the 5 figures who entered with the unmistakable swagger of special operations personnel. The Delta Force team moved like predators entering familiar hunting grounds, their presence immediately shifting the bunker's atmosphere from professional efficiency to something more primal. Master Sergeant Jake Donovan led the group, his 6'2" frame filling the doorway like a human wall. His completely bald head gleamed under the fluorescent lighting, drawing attention to pale gray eyes that seemed to calculate the room's vulnerabilities out of pure habit. A network of old scars across his face and neck told the story of a man who'd survived encounters that had killed others, and the way he carried himself suggested he took pride in that fact. His green military t-shirt stretched tight across a torso, built through years of combat conditioning. Behind him came Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, whose nickname Bull seemed almost inadequate for his massive 240-pound frame. Thompson moved with the deliberate care of someone who'd learned that his size could be both asset and liability. But his small, dark eyes held an intelligence that many opponents had underestimated to their cost. Sergeant First Class Ryan Coleman, known as Ghost, for reasons that became apparent the moment you tried to track his movement through a room, positioned himself near the bunker's secondary exit with unconscious tactical awareness. His lean build and unremarkable features made him the kind of person who could disappear in crowds, a valuable trait for someone whose job involved getting close to people who didn't want to be found. Staff Sergeant Derek Patterson, wired to his teammates, possessed the nervous energy of someone who'd spent years working with explosives and learned to channel adrenaline into surgical precision. His hands never stopped moving, fingers tapping complex patterns against his thigh, as if inputting detonation sequences from muscle memory. Specialist Tommy Johnson, at 24, the youngest member of the team, carried himself with the eager intensity of someone still proving he belonged among these legendary operators. His teammates called him Kid, but the call sign held respect rather than condescension. He'd earned his place in ways that left marks on his soul, if not his body. Donovan's gaze swept the communications bunker with professional assessment before settling on Sloane's workstation. Mitchell. His voice carried the particular authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. We need to borrow your expertise. Torres straightened at the implied command in Donovan's tone, but protocol required him to maintain control over his personnel. Sergeant, any requests for my staff should come through proper channels. Donovan's smile held all the warmth of a blade edge. This comes from the colonel directly. We've got sensitive communications that need monitoring during tonight's operation. Mitchell has the clearance and the skills we need. Sloane's fingers had stopped their constant typing, though her screens continued displaying the steady flow of data that kept the base connected to the outside world. What kind of monitoring, Sergeant? The classified kind. Thompson interjected, his voice carrying the subtle threat that large men often used instead of outright intimidation. The kind where you follow orders and don't ask questions that are above your pay grade. The temperature in the bunker seemed to drop several degrees as the Delta team's presence shifted from professional to something more ominous. Torres felt the change like a physical weight, but military hierarchy bound him to cooperation, even when every instinct screamed warnings. Sloane's response came in the same calm tone she'd used to explain technical problems. Copy that. When do you need me? 1,800 hours. Coleman spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly through the bunker. Full gear, long duration capability. Patterson's fingers drummed faster against his leg as he added, And Mitchell, tonight's operation requires absolute discretion, the kind where loose lips cause body bags. The threat hung in the recycled air like cordite smoke. Around the bunker, other personnel had found reasons to focus intently on their own workstations, displaying the survival instinct that kept soldiers alive in environments where asking the wrong questions could have permanent consequences. Sloane nodded once, a gesture that conveyed understanding without submission. Understood. Anything else? Johnson, perhaps feeling the need to contribute to the intimidation display, stepped closer to her workstation. Yeah, whatever you think you know about tonight, forget it. Your job is to monitor frequencies and keep your mouth shut. Simple enough for a communications specialist to understand. For just a moment, something flickered in Sloane's green eyes. Not fear, not anger, but something colder and more calculating. The expression vanished so quickly that only the most observant would have noticed. But it left an impression like the brief glimpse of a shark's fin beneath calm water. Crystal clear, she replied, her voice maintaining its professional neutrality. Donovan studied her face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people's intentions in their micro-expressions. Sloane Mitchell had always struck him as too competent, too knowledgeable about systems and procedures that should have been beyond a basic communication specialist. Tonight would provide the perfect opportunity to determine whether she posed a genuine threat or simply possessed above-average technical skills. The Delta team departed with the same dramatic efficiency they displayed upon arrival, leaving the bunker feeling somehow larger and more breathable in their absence. Torres waited until their footsteps had faded before approaching Sloane's workstation again. Mitchell, you don't have to do this. I can contact higher command, file a personnel request denial. Sloane's fingers had resumed their dance across the keyboards, but her screens now displayed different information streams. Technical specifications for long-range communication equipment, encryption protocols that weren't part of standard training curricula, and data patterns that suggested a deeper understanding of the base's communication infrastructure than any single operator should possess. Thank you, sir, but it's fine. Just another night shift. She paused in her typing to pull up a new display screen. Sir, have you noticed any unusual communication patterns lately? Outgoing transmissions that don't match standard operational requirements? Torres frowned at the question. What kind of patterns? Encrypted burst transmissions on non-standard frequencies, usually occurring during shift changes or meal periods when fewer people are monitoring. Are you suggesting someone's making unauthorized communications? Sloane's hands moved across her keyboard, bringing up a data visualization that showed communication traffic over the past 72 hours. Red markers indicated transmissions that didn't correlate with known operational requirements, forming a pattern that suggested systematic coordination with external parties. I'm suggesting that someone's been very careful to hide what they're doing, but not careful enough. Torres studied the display with growing alarm. The implications of unauthorized communications from a forward operating base in hostile territory ranged from serious security breaches to outright treason. Mitchell, this information needs to go to Sir. Sloane's voice carried a note of urgency that made him stop mid-sentence. Not yet. If I'm right about what this represents, then reporting it through normal channels could compromise whatever investigation might follow. What are you saying? I'm saying that tonight's operation might not be what it appears to be, and the people who recruited me might not have the Army's best interests in mind. The weight of that statement settled over the communications bunker like a physical presence. Torres had served 3 combat deployments and thought he'd seen every variety of betrayal that war could produce. But the suggestion that elite American operators might be working against their own forces struck him as almost incomprehensible. Have you spotted the warning signs yet? Comment below if you can guess what Sloan's really planning. Don't forget to share this video with your friends. They won't be able to look away from what's about to unfold. The afternoon briefing took place in FOB Warrior's main tactical operations center, a windowless concrete room dominated by large screen displays showing satellite imagery, drone feeds, and communication intercepts from across the Kunar province. 37 personnel crowded into the space, representing every major function of the forward operating base's mission. Colonel William Hayes stood at the briefing podium with the bearing of someone who'd earned his rank through competence rather than politics. At 48, he'd commanded troops in 3 major conflicts and developed the kind of operational instincts that kept soldiers alive in environments where mistakes measured their consequences in body bags. His weathered face showed the accumulated stress of decisions that affected hundreds of lives. But his voice carried unwavering authority. Intelligence indicates a coordinated Taliban attack planned for multiple American positions within the next 24 hours, Hayes announced, gesturing towards satellite images that showed 3 different base locations. Our sources suggest they've obtained detailed information about our defensive positions, patrol schedules, and communication protocols. Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembled personnel. Intelligence leaks represented one of the most serious threats facing forward operating bases, potentially turning routine operations into carefully orchestrated death traps. Major Rebecca Williams, the base intelligence officer, stepped forward to continue the briefing. The attack plan appears sophisticated beyond typical Taliban capabilities. We're looking at coordinated strikes designed to maximize casualties while minimizing their own losses. This suggests they've received information from someone with intimate knowledge of our operations. Sloan sat in the back row of the briefing room, her laptop balanced on her knees as she appeared to take routine notes, but her screens displayed information streams that had nothing to do with the official presentation. Communication logs from the past week, frequency analysis reports, and data patterns that painted a picture none of the other attendees could see. The Delta Force team occupied prime seating in the briefing room's front section, their collective presence commanding attention even when they remained silent. Donovan's pale eyes scanned the assembled personnel with the calculating assessment of someone evaluating potential threats and assets. His gaze lingered on Sloan's workstation, longer than seemed necessary, noting details that others might miss. Thompson's massive frame dominated 2 chairs, but his attention focused on the satellite imagery with professional interest. The planned attacks would require the kind of coordination that suggested significant financial backing. And financial backing meant opportunities for those willing to look beyond conventional loyalties. Patterson's hands maintained their constant nervous movement, fingers tapping sequences that might have been Morse code or detonation timing. His technical background made him uniquely qualified to assess the intelligence value of information that could enable such sophisticated attacks. Coleman remained perfectly still, but his eyes tracked every person in the room with the systematic attention of someone cataloging potential targets. His position near the briefing room's exit wasn't accidental, nor was his clear view of every person who might pose a threat to his team's interests. Johnson took notes with the eager intensity of someone still proving himself worthy of elite company, but his frequent glances toward his teammates suggested he was more concerned with their approval than the briefing content. Hayes continued the presentation with grim efficiency. Based on this intelligence, all non-essential operations are suspended. We're implementing enhanced security protocols and increasing patrol frequency around our perimeter. Questions? A hand rose from the middle section of personnel. Sir, what's the confidence level on this intelligence? Are we talking about definitive attack plans or general threat assessment? Williams answered without consulting notes. High confidence. Multiple independent sources confirmed the basic attack framework, though specific timing remains uncertain. Sloane's laptop screen displayed a different story. The communication pattern she'd been tracking suggested that the intelligence might not be as independent as claimed. Burst transmissions from Phobie Warrior had preceded each reported intelligence confirmation by approximately 6 hours, indicating a level of coordination that raised disturbing possibilities. Another question came from the left side of the room. Are we evacuating non-combatant personnel? Negative, Hayes replied. Full evacuation would signal our awareness of the threat and potentially accelerate the attack timeline. We maintain normal operations while implementing enhanced defensive measures. Donovan chose that moment to speak, his voice carrying the authority of someone whose opinions carried special weight. Colonel, my team requests permission to conduct reconnaissance in force. If we can identify the attack staging areas, we might be able to disrupt their preparations. Hayes nodded approvingly. Granted. What do you need? Air support, communication relay capability, and perhaps someone from your staff who knows the local communication patterns. The enemy's been adapting their methods, and we need someone who understands their current protocols. Patterson leaned forward slightly, adding his voice to the request. Someone with technical expertise who can monitor multiple frequencies simultaneously. The kind of specialist who might catch transmission patterns that automated systems would miss. The recommendation wasn't subtle, and Hayes recognized the implied suggestion immediately. Mitchell, you're available for temporary assignment. Sloane looked up from her laptop with an expression of professional readiness that masked whatever calculations were running behind those green eyes. Yes, sir. When do you need me? 1800 hours. Coleman answered before Hayes could respond, establishing control over the timeline with quiet efficiency. Thompson's contribution came in the form of what might have been a helpful suggestion, but carried undertones of something more ominous. Ma'am, this kind of operation can be dangerous for personnel without extensive field experience. You sure you're prepared for that level of responsibility? I can handle whatever the mission requires, Sloane replied, her voice steady despite the implied challenge. Johnson, perhaps feeling left out of the intimidation display, added his own comment. Good, because out there, hesitation gets people killed. Your people, their people, doesn't matter to the bullets. The briefing concluded with routine administrative announcements, but the tension in the room had shifted from concern about external threats to something more personal and immediate. As personnel filed out of the Tactical Operations Center, conversations broke into smaller groups that seemed to exclude rather than include certain participants. Torres approached Sloane as she packed her laptop, his expression reflecting the concern of someone who'd begun to recognize patterns that disturbed him. Mitchell, about tonight's operation, you sure you want to do this? Why wouldn't I be? Because something about this whole situation feels orchestrated. The timing, the intelligence, the specific request for your skills. It's like someone arranged for you to be in a particular place, at a particular time. Sloane's hands paused in their equipment packing. Sir, what if that's exactly what happened? What if someone did arrange this? Then we need to report it immediately, or we need to let it play out and see where it leads. She finished packing her gear and stood to face him directly. Sir, sometimes the best way to catch predators is to let them think they're hunting prey. Torres felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning system. Mitchell, what aren't you telling me? I'm telling you that tonight's operation might be the most important thing I've ever done, and that when it's over, either we'll have answers to questions we didn't know we should be asking, or none of this will matter anymore. The communications bunker had taken on a different atmosphere by the time evening approached. Standard shift rotations had reduced personnel to essential monitoring functions, creating an environment where conversations could occur without unwanted attention. Sloane used the relative privacy to implement preparations that would have raised questions during regular operations. Her workstation now displayed multiple data streams that included encrypted communication protocols, satellite uplink capabilities, and frequency monitoring ranges that exceeded standard communications specialist requirements by considerable margins. To casual observation, she appeared to be conducting routine permission equipment checks. Closer inspection would have revealed preparations for communication warfare capabilities that suggested training far beyond her official specialty. Rodriguez, a communications specialist 2 years senior to Sloan, approached her workstation with the kind of careful attention that indicated personal concern rather than professional curiosity. At 29, Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez had worked alongside Sloan for 8 months and developed both professional respect and personal friendship with someone she considered one of the most competent operators on the base. "Sloan, you sure about tonight? Those Delta guys give me bad vibes." "Why is that?" Rodriguez glanced around the bunker to ensure their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "They've been asking questions, weird questions, about communication protocols, about who has access to what systems, about how much autonomy communications personnel have during field operations." "What kind of questions specifically, like whether someone in communications could modify transmission logs, whether certain types of equipment malfunctions could be induced remotely, whether communication failures during operations would trigger automatic investigation protocols?" Sloan's hands continued their equipment preparation, but her attention focused entirely on Rodriguez's information. "When did these questions start?" "About a week ago, right around the time those intelligence reports started coming in about Taliban attack plans. Maria, I need you to do something for me, but I need you to trust me completely, even if what I ask doesn't make sense." Rodriguez recognized the tone of someone who'd moved beyond routine concerns into territory where trust became a matter of life and death. "What do you need? If something happens to me tonight, if I don't come back, or if you hear that there was some kind of accident or equipment malfunction, I need you to check the automated backup logs from the past 72 hours. Not the primary logs that can be modified, but the redundant backup systems that most people don't know exist." "What am I looking for?" "Communication patterns that don't match official operations. Transmissions that occur during shift changes or meal breaks. Encrypted data bursts that might look like routine system maintenance, but don't correlate with actual maintenance schedules." Rodriguez felt her stomach tighten with growing apprehension. "Sloan, what's really going on?" "I think someone's been selling information to people who want to kill Americans. And I think tonight's operation is designed to eliminate the person who figured it out." The implications of that statement settled over the communications bunker like a toxic cloud. Rodriguez had served 2 combat deployments and understood that war produced betrayals of every conceivable variety. But the suggestion that elite American operators might be facilitating attacks on their own forces represented a level of treachery that challenged her fundamental assumptions about loyalty and honor. "If that's true, then you can't go on this operation. If that's true, then this operation is the only chance to prove it and to stop whatever they're planning next." Rodriguez stared at her friend with growing recognition of the impossible situation they faced. Military hierarchy demanded obedience to orders, but those same orders might be leading Sloan into a carefully orchestrated death trap. "There has to be another way." "Maybe there is, but not one that guarantees innocent people won't die while we're trying to find it." The communications bunker's main door opened to admit the Delta Force team at exactly 1,800 hours, their timing suggesting military precision applied to personal missions. The 5 operators had changed into field gear that made them appear even more formidable than their earlier appearance had suggested. Donovan wore full combat equipment with the confident familiarity of someone who'd tested every component under fire. His weapon selection and gear placement reflected years of experience optimizing for effectiveness rather than appearance, but the overall impression was of someone prepared for war rather than reconnaissance. Thompson's massive frame carried additional equipment that suggested his role extended beyond basic team member into specialized capabilities. The weight that might have burdened other operators seemed to barely register on his powerful build, leaving him as mobile and dangerous as his smaller teammates. Coleman had somehow managed to make full combat gear appear almost casual, as if wearing 50-pound numbers of weapons and equipment was his natural state. His movement through the bunker maintained the same ghost-like quality that made observers forget his presence even when looking directly at him. Patterson's gear reflected his technical specialties, but the specific equipment selection suggested capabilities that extended beyond basic explosive ordnance disposal into areas that might include communication disruption and electronic warfare. Johnson carried himself with the eager energy of someone anticipating action, but his frequent glances toward his teammates indicated continued uncertainty about his role in whatever was planned for the evening's operation. Donovan addressed the bunker personnel with the assumption of authority that came naturally to someone accustomed to controlling situations through force of personality. "Mitchell, you ready to earn your pay tonight?" Sloan finished her equipment checks and stood to face the Delta team directly. Her gray t-shirt and dark military pants appeared almost civilian compared to their combat gear, but something in her posture suggested she wasn't as defenseless as her appearance implied. "Ready when you are, Sergeant?" Patterson studied her equipment selection with professional assessment. "That's your full loadout. No additional communication gear. Everything I need is here." She patted a compact equipment case that could have contained anything from basic radio components to sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Thompson's contribution came in the form of what might have been friendly advice, but carried undertones of threat. "Hope you're not afraid of flying because we'll be doing this operation from altitude." "I've been in helicopters before, Johnson. Perhaps trying to contribute to the team's psychological pressure campaign," added his own comment. "At night, over hostile territory with people shooting at you. That's different from peacetime training flights." Sloan's response carried the same professional calm she'd maintained throughout the day. "I'm sure it is." Coleman spoke for the first time since entering the bunker, his whisper-quiet voice somehow carrying more menace than his teammates' overt intimidation. "Some people discover they're not cut out for real operations when the shooting starts. When that happens, they become liabilities instead of assets, and liabilities sometimes don't make it home," Patterson added, his nervous finger-tapping accelerating into patterns that might have been countdown sequences. The communication equipment around them continued its steady electronic chatter, maintaining connections with patrol units and aircraft throughout the Kunar province. But the atmosphere in the bunker had shifted into something that felt more like preparation for execution than military cooperation. Torres, who had been monitoring the exchange from his supervisor's position, stepped forward with growing concern about the direction the conversation was taking. "Gentlemen, Specialist Mitchell is one of our most capable personnel. She'll perform whatever duties you assign with complete professionalism." Donovan's smile contained all the warmth of winter moonlight. "I'm sure she will, Lieutenant. I'm sure she'll give us exactly what we need." As the Delta team prepared to depart with their reluctant communications specialist, none of the bunker personnel could have predicted that they were witnessing the opening moves of a chess game where only one player understood all the rules. Sloan Mitchell gathered her equipment with the methodical care of someone preparing for the most important mission of her career. While her escorts believed they were simply collecting evidence for disposal, the helicopter pad at Fob Warrior hummed with the controlled activity of a night operation preparing for launch. Ground crews performed final maintenance checks on a Black Hawk helicopter, while flight crews reviewed navigation routes and communication protocols. The familiar ritual of pre-mission preparation provided comfort through routine, even when the mission itself carried uncommon dangers. Sloan approached the aircraft with her equipment case secured and her personal gear arranged for quick access during flight. Her light brown hair caught the last rays of sunset as she walked across the tarmac, creating an almost ethereal quality that contrasted sharply with the military hardware surrounding her. The Delta team loaded their equipment with practice efficiency, but their arrangement within the helicopter's cabin suggested preparation for multiple contingencies. Weapons placement, communication equipment positioning, and personnel seating all reflected consideration for scenarios that might extend beyond simple reconnaissance missions. Chief Warrant Officer David Park, the Blackhawk's pilot, completed his pre-flight checklist with the methodical attention that had kept him alive through 47 combat missions. At 34, Park had earned a reputation for getting his passengers where they needed to go, regardless of weather, enemy action, or mechanical difficulties. "Evening, folks," Park announced through the aircraft's internal communication system. "Flight time to target area approximately 25 minutes. Weather's clear. No significant wind factors. Visibility unlimited." Donovan settled into the cabin's leadership position, his size and presence establishing dominance even in the confined space. "Park, we'll need you to maintain position at 8,000 feet during our observation phase. That altitude keeps us above small arms range while providing good communication relay capability." "Copy that. How long do you anticipate remaining on station?" "Depends on what we find," Thompson interjected, his massive frame making the helicopter's cabin appear smaller. "Could be a quick look. Could be an extended surveillance mission." Coleman positioned himself near one of the cabin's observation windows with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested he'd performed similar missions countless times before. His equipment placement gave him clear fields of view while maintaining ready access to weapons and communication systems. Patterson's technical gear occupied significant cabin space, but his arrangement of electronic equipment suggested capabilities that extended beyond routine reconnaissance requirements. Multiple devices connected through cables that formed a complex network of electronic warfare potential. Johnson took his position with the nervous energy of someone whose adrenaline had begun flowing in anticipation of action. His frequent equipment checks and position adjustments revealed both inexperience with high-stakes operations and determination to prove his value to veteran teammates. Sloan secured herself into the cabin's designated position for non-combat personnel, but her equipment placement and posture suggested awareness of tactical considerations that went beyond basic safety requirements. Her gear case remained within easy reach, and her positioning allowed observation of both the aircraft systems and her fellow passengers. The Blackhawk's engines spun up to operational power, their sound drowning out casual conversation and creating the familiar environment where communication required electronic assistance. Through her headset, Sloan could monitor both the flight crew's professional coordination and the Delta team's internal communications. "All stations, this is Warrior Base," came the radio transmission that authorized their departure. "Reaper 6 is cleared for reconnaissance mission as briefed. Maintain communication schedule Alpha." Park acknowledged the transmission and began the helicopter's departure from FOB Warrior, lifting smoothly into the Afghan night sky. Below them, the forward operating base grew smaller until its lights appeared as just another cluster of artificial illumination in the vast darkness of the Kunar province. As the aircraft climbed toward its assigned altitude, the landscape below revealed the stark beauty that had attracted and destroyed armies throughout history. Mountains rose like ancient monuments, their peaks catching starlight in ways that made them appear both majestic and menacing. Deep valleys held shadows that could conceal entire armies, while high ridges provided observation points for anyone patient enough to wait. 20 minutes into the flight, Donovan activated his communication system to address the helicopter's occupants. "Mitchell, we're approaching the target area. I need you to monitor all communication frequencies for Taliban coordination signals." Sloan adjusted her equipment and began systematic frequency monitoring, her expertise immediately apparent in the efficiency with which she covered multiple communication bands. "Copy. Anything specific I should listen for?" "Communication patterns that might indicate preparation for coordinated attacks. Multiple units receiving simultaneous instructions. Timing coordination. anything that suggests a level of organization beyond typical Taliban capabilities. Patterson leaned forward from his position, adding technical specifications to the request. Pay particular attention to burst transmissions and encrypted communications, the kind of professional coordination that suggests outside assistance. Thompson's contribution came in his characteristic blunt style. And Mitchell, if you hear anything that might compromise American operations, you report it immediately. No analysis, no interpretation, just raw information. Coleman's whisper-quiet voice carried clearly through the communication system despite the helicopter's noise. Because hesitation in passing critical information can get people killed. Your people, their people, everyone. Johnson, perhaps feeling obligated to participate in the team's collective pressure campaign, added his own emphasis. And out here, getting people killed has permanent consequences, the kind that families back home have to live with forever. The psychological campaign was obvious in its intent, but sophisticated in its application, designed to establish dominance while creating emotional pressure that might cause tactical errors. But Sloan's response suggested someone familiar with such techniques and unimpressed by their application. Understood. I'll pass any relevant information immediately upon detection. The helicopter continued its flight toward coordinates that would position them above terrain, ideal for observation and communication interception. But as altitude and distance separated them from the safety of FOB Warrior, the dynamics within the aircraft cabin began shifting in ways that had nothing to do with mission requirements. Donovan studied Sloan's profile as she worked, noting details that might have escaped casual observation. Her equipment operations showed familiarity that exceeded basic communications training. Her frequency monitoring revealed knowledge of Taliban communication protocols that shouldn't have been available to someone at her security clearance level. Most disturbing of all, her overall demeanor suggested confidence rather than the nervousness that should accompany a specialist's first high-risk mission. The aircraft reached its designated altitude and began orbiting the target area. According to the mission profile, 8,000 feet below, the Kunar province spread out in all directions, its valleys and ridges, creating a landscape that had challenged foreign armies since ancient times. Through night vision systems, ground features appeared in stark detail, but human activity remained largely invisible from their elevation. Park's voice crackled through the communication system. On station at 8,000 feet, communication relay is optimal. Visibility is unlimited. How long do you need for your observation? Donovan's response carried implications that went beyond routine mission parameters. As long as it takes, Chief. Some missions require patience to develop properly. Copy that. Fuel gives us approximately 2 hours on station before we need to head home. That timeline should have provided ample opportunity for reconnaissance and communication monitoring. It should have been sufficient to gather whatever intelligence the Delta team required for their legitimate mission objectives. But as the minutes ticked by, it became increasingly clear that the team's actual agenda differed significantly from their official mission briefing. Sloan continued her systematic monitoring of communication frequencies. Her professional attention focused on detecting the Taliban coordination that justified their presence over this particular section of terrain, but her peripheral awareness tracked the subtle changes in her companion's behavior as the mission progressed beyond routine parameters. Patterson had begun connecting electronic equipment in ways that suggested capabilities extending beyond passive monitoring into active communication disruption. His technical setup resembled preparation for electronic warfare rather than simple reconnaissance. Coleman's positioning had shifted to provide better observation of the aircraft's interior rather than the terrain below. His weapons remained secured but easily accessible, suggesting preparation for action within the helicopter rather than against external threats. Thompson's massive presence had somehow become more menacing, his earlier casual intimidation evolving into something that felt like imminent threat. His attention focused on Sloan with calculating assessment that had nothing to do with mission requirements. Johnson's nervous energy had developed a predatory quality, as if anticipation of action had replaced anxiety about performance. His frequent glances toward his teammates suggested coordination that excluded the aircraft's non-Delta personnel. Only Donovan maintained his earlier professional demeanor, but his pale eyes had acquired an intensity that suggested significant decisions approaching implementation. When he spoke, his voice carried authority that seemed to establish new mission parameters. "Mitchell, we need to discuss something. Something that affects the security of American forces in this region." Sloane's hands never paused in their equipment operation, but her attention focused completely on Donovan's words. "I'm listening. Intelligence suggests that someone has been providing tactical information to Taliban forces, communication protocols, patrol schedules, base defensive arrangements, the kind of detailed intelligence that could facilitate the attacks we were warned about. That's a serious accusation." Patterson's voice carried technical authority as he elaborated on the implications. "It's more than an accusation. We have evidence, communication logs, timing correlations, pattern analysis that points to someone with intimate knowledge of FOB Warriors operations." Thompson's blunt delivery removed any pretense of subtlety from the accusations. "Someone who has access to all communication systems. Someone who knows exactly what information would be most valuable to enemy forces." Coleman's whisper carried menace that seemed to fill the helicopter's cabin. "Someone who might think they're clever enough to cover their tracks, but electronic communications leave traces that skilled investigators can follow." Johnson's contribution revealed the team's conclusion with eager finality. "Someone like a communications specialist who has access to everything and answers to nobody." The accusations hung in the thin air at 8,000 feet, like incendiary devices waiting for detonation. Sloane's response would determine whether the evening continued as reconnaissance mission or evolved into something far more dangerous for everyone involved. But her answer revealed depths that none of her accusers had anticipated. "You're absolutely right," she said calmly, her hands still working the communication equipment with steady precision. "I'm confirming your analysis. Someone has definitely been selling information to people who want to kill Americans." She turned to face them directly for the first time since the accusations began, and something in her expression made even Thompson shift uncomfortably in his seat. "The question is whether you're smart enough to figure out who." The silence that followed Sloane's challenge stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. 8,000 feet above the Kunar province, 5 Delta Force operators found themselves facing a situation none of their training had prepared them for. A communications specialist who seemed to know more about their operation than they did. Donovan's pale eyes fixed on Sloane with the intensity of someone recalculating every assumption he'd made about tonight's mission. His massive frame tensed as he processed the implications of her words. But years of combat experience had taught him to maintain operational focus, even when circumstances evolved beyond original parameters. "Mitchell, you're going to explain exactly what you think you know." Sloane's fingers continued their steady work on the communication equipment, but her green eyes held his gaze with unsettling directness. "I know that burst transmissions have been leaving FOB Warrior every 48 hours for the past 3 weeks. I know they've been timed to coincide with shift changes when fewer people monitor outgoing communications. I know they contain tactical information that could facilitate coordinated attacks on American positions." Patterson's nervous finger-tapping accelerated into patterns that resembled countdown sequences. "That's classified intelligence analysis. How would a communication specialist have access to that level of information? The same way she'd have access to communication logs that could identify who's been making unauthorized transmissions," Thompson added, his massive presence somehow becoming more threatening in the confined helicopter cabin. Coleman's whisper carried clearly through the communication system despite the aircraft's noise. "Unless she's the one making those transmissions. Unless we're looking at the source rather than an investigator." Johnson leaned forward with eager anticipation, his youth making him the most obvious in displaying the team's collective hostility. That would explain why she knows so much about Taliban communication protocols. Hard to sell information to people if you can't talk to them. The accusations converged like crossfire, but Sloane's response revealed depths that caught them completely off guard. She reached into her equipment case with deliberate movement, withdrawing a device that appeared far more sophisticated than standard communication gear. "You're absolutely right about the unauthorized transmissions," she said calmly, activating the device with practiced efficiency. "Someone has been selling tactical information to Taliban commanders, someone with intimate knowledge of base operations and security protocols." The device in her hands began displaying data streams that showed real-time communication intercepts from multiple frequencies simultaneously. Information that should have required extensive technical infrastructure appeared on a compact unit that belonged in science fiction, rather than standard military equipment. Someone who knows exactly which information would be most valuable to enemy forces planning coordinated attacks. Someone who understands timing, operational security, and how to cover their electronic tracks. Patterson stared at the device with professional recognition that transcended his hostility. "That's not standard issue equipment. Where did you get that?" "Someone who has clearance levels that don't appear on any organizational chart at Phobie Warrior," Sloane continued, her voice maintaining its calm tone, despite the growing tension in the cabin. "Someone whose real job has nothing to do with routine communication support." Donovan's hand moved toward his sidearm with the careful deliberation of someone preparing for action. "Mitchell, you're going to shut down that equipment and explain exactly who you're working for. I'm working for the same people you swore an oath to serve. The question is whether you remember what that oath meant." Thompson's blunt delivery cut through the increasingly complex verbal maneuvering. "Enough games. You're either a traitor or you're not. Which is it?" Sloane's laugh carried genuine amusement that seemed completely inappropriate for the situation. "I'm the person who's been tracking your little side business for the past 6 months. The person who documented every transmission, every payment, every piece of tactical information you've sold to people who want to kill Americans." The admission hung in the thin air, like an explosive device with a lit fuse. The Delta team exchanged glances that communicated volumes about coordination developed through years of operations together. But their collective assessment had shifted from simple elimination to damage control. Coleman's positioning had changed subtly, his weapons now easily accessible despite their supposed security. "If you have evidence, then you should have reported it through proper channels." "To who? Your chain of command? The same people who approved tonight's mission?" Sloane's green eyes seemed to glow with inner light as she continued. "The same people who arranged for me to be on this helicopter at this altitude over this particular section of terrain where accidents happen and bodies disappear." Patterson's technical equipment had been quietly reconfigured during the conversation, but now he activated systems that should have disrupted communication capabilities within the aircraft. Electronic warfare countermeasures designed to prevent enemy interception of their conversations. Except Sloane's device continued functioning with complete efficiency, displaying information that shouldn't have been accessible under electronic attack conditions. "That's not possible," Patterson muttered, staring at his system's displays with confusion. "Full-spectrum jamming should have killed everything electronic in this cabin." "It should have," Sloane agreed pleasantly, "unless someone has access to military technology that's about 15 years ahead of your current equipment. Do you see how the tables are turning? This is the moment everything changes. If your heart is racing right now, hit that like button and get ready for the most shocking twist you've ever seen in a military story." Donovan had reached his decision point with the decisive clarity that had kept him alive through countless operations. Whatever Sloane Mitchell represented, whether intelligence asset or security threat, she had become a liability that required immediate resolution. "Chief Park," he called to the pilot through the communication system. We need to reduce altitude for better observation capability. Copy. Descending to 6,000 foot. Negative. Maintain current altitude. We're going to make some adjustments to our mission profile. The veteran pilot's voice carried confusion as he responded. Reaper 6, please clarify mission adjustment. But Donovan had already activated internal communications that excluded the flight crew, establishing a private channel for coordination among the Delta team members. What followed was a conversation conducted in hand signals and whispered words that civilian personnel weren't meant to understand. The helicopter's crew chief, Staff Sergeant Martinez, noticed the team's unusual behavior, but attributed it to operational security requirements that often accompanied special operations missions. His attention focused on monitoring aircraft systems and maintaining communication with base, missing the subtle preparations occurring in the passenger cabin. Sloan continued her equipment operation with apparent obliviousness to the changing dynamics around her. But her peripheral awareness tracked every movement, every gesture, every indication of impending action. The sophisticated device in her hands displayed information streams that included real-time monitoring of the helicopter's communication systems, revealing conversations that its participants assumed were private. Mitchell, Donovan's voice had acquired the flat tone that preceded irrevocable action. Stand up and move toward the cabin door. Why would I do that? Thompson's massive frame shifted position to block potential escape routes within the confined space, because refusing orders from senior personnel during combat operations constitutes insubordination, the kind that gets people court-martialed. Coleman had produced the length of tactical rope with efficiency that suggested preparation for this exact scenario. Sometimes, insubordinate personnel require physical restraint for their own safety and the mission's security. Patterson's electronic equipment had evolved from jamming systems into something more ominous, devices that could disable aircraft systems or disrupt communication with ground control if necessary to maintain operational security. Johnson's eagerness had transformed into predatory anticipation as he realized he was about to witness the elimination of a threat to their collective enterprise. His role would be minimal but memorable, a baptism of violence that would bind him to his teammates through shared culpability. Sloan studied their preparations with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating a chess position where multiple pieces threatened simultaneously. Her response revealed planning that extended far beyond tonight's helicopter ride. Before you make your next move, you should know that everything we've discussed tonight has been transmitted in real time to secure servers maintained by people who will notice if the transmission stops. Donovan's pale eyes narrowed as he processed this information. Bluff. You don't have that capability. I have capabilities you can't imagine. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize when you're outmatched. But intelligence and wisdom weren't the same thing, and the Delta team had invested too much in their current course of action to abandon it based on threats they couldn't verify. Patterson's equipment showed no evidence of external transmissions from the helicopter, suggesting that Sloan's claims were psychological warfare rather than operational reality. Cutter, harness. Donovan ordered with finality that ended all negotiation. Coleman moved with practiced efficiency, his knife slicing through the restraint straps that secured Sloan to the helicopter's floor. The motion was surgical in its precision, designed to leave no time for resistance or escape. Thompson's massive hands seized her arms with crushing force, lifting her slight frame as if she weighed nothing. His grip positioned her directly in front of the helicopter's open door, where 8,000 foot of darkness waited like an hungry mouth. Patterson disabled the aircraft's internal communication system that might have allowed the pilot to realize what was occurring in the passenger cabin. His electronic warfare equipment created a bubble of communication isolation that prevented unwanted observation of their actions. Johnson positioned himself to assist in the final act, his nervous energy channeled into eager participation that would make him complicit in whatever followed. The helicopter's door gaped open beside them, revealing the vast darkness of the Afghan night. Wind rushing through the opening created a howling soundtrack that seemed appropriate for what was about to occur. "Should have stayed home, Mitchell," Donovan said, his voice carrying no regret for what necessity demanded. Then they threw her out. The night swallowed her completely, her small form disappearing into the darkness below like a stone dropped into deep water. No scream, no desperate plea for mercy, just the sudden absence of someone who had become too dangerous to live. In the helicopter cabin, 5 Delta Force operators stared at the empty door opening with the satisfaction of professionals who had resolved a significant threat to their continued prosperity. The elimination had been clean, efficient, and completely deniable as an equipment malfunction that could happen to anyone. Product ad. During the mission, Sloan relied on her advanced tactical communication device, featuring military-grade encryption and satellite uplink capabilities, ensuring secure data transmission even under the most extreme operational conditions, where standard equipment would fail completely. Product. Advanced military communication systems, but their satisfaction lasted exactly 17 seconds. The radio crackled to life with crystal clarity that cut through their sense of accomplishment like a laser through armor. "All call signs. This is Phantom Signal. Mission complete. Package delivered." The voice was unmistakably Sloan Mitchell's, but it carried authority that none of them had heard before. Not the professional courtesy of a communication specialist, but the command presence of someone accustomed to controlling situations through superior knowledge and capability. Donovan stared at his radio handset, as if it had transformed into a venomous snake. "That's impossible. We just Reaper 6. Do you copy?" The transmission continued with conversational ease that suggested the speaker was nowhere near 8,000 feet of freefall. "Your package has been delivered exactly where it needed to be. Clock starts now." Patterson frantically checked his electronic warfare systems, but every display confirmed that their jamming equipment was functioning perfectly. No external communications should have been possible within the helicopter, yet Sloan's voice continued with disturbing clarity. "Reaper Team, you should know that your conversation for the past 37 minutes has been recorded and transmitted to servers maintained by the National Security Agency's Cyber Command Division. Every confession, every admission, every detail of your operation." Thompson's massive frame had gone completely still, as if movement might somehow make the situation worse. "How is she transmitting? She fell 8,000 feet. Did I?" Sloan's voice carried amusement that seemed completely inappropriate for someone who should be dead. "Or did you just provide me with the perfect cover for initiating the final phase of an operation you never understood?" Coleman's whisper had acquired desperate undertones as operational confidence collapsed into something approaching panic. "This isn't possible. Nobody survives that kind of fall. You're absolutely right. Nobody survives falling 8,000 feet without preparation. Good thing I've been preparing for 6 months." Johnson's eager anticipation had transformed into horror as he realized they might have killed someone who wasn't actually dead. "What does that mean?" "It means you've been playing checkers while I've been playing chess. It means every move you made tonight was anticipated and accounted for. It means you've confessed to treason while I recorded everything." The helicopter's pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Park, had begun monitoring their communication channel as standard protocol required when aircraft experienced unusual electronic activity. His voice crackled through their headsets with growing alarm. "Reaper 6, I'm picking up multiple communication intercepts from our position. Unknown parties are monitoring this frequency." But Sloan's voice overrode his transmission with technical authority that suggested control of communication systems that should have been impossible to access from outside the aircraft. "Chief Park, this is Colonel Sarah Mitchell. Cyber Command call sign Phantom Signal. You are ordered to return to FOB Warrior immediately and place your passengers under arrest for conspiracy, treason, and attempted murder of a federal agent. The silence that followed was absolute, except for the helicopter's rotors and the wind rushing through the still open door. Park's voice, when it came, carried the uncertainty of someone whose world had just reorganized itself around entirely new parameters. Ma'am, please authenticate your identity and authority. Authentication code 77. Charlie 95. Bravo. Authorization comes directly from General Morrison, J.C. Priority Alpha classification. Your passengers are under arrest, effective immediately. Park's response revealed the depth of their situation with devastating clarity. Copy, Colonel Mitchell. Returning to base. Reaper team, you are ordered to secure all weapons and remain in your seats. Donovan's pale eyes had acquired the glazed look of someone processing information too rapidly for comfortable comprehension. You're not dead. I'm very much alive, and I'm very disappointed in all of you. Patterson's technical background finally provided him with operational understanding that his teammates lacked. The fall was staged. You had survival equipment we couldn't detect. I had preparation you couldn't imagine. The question now is whether you understand what happens next. Thompson's blunt assessment revealed the team's new reality with crushing finality. We're finished. Yes, you are. You. Coleman's whisper had acquired the quality of someone recognizing irrevocable consequences. How long have you known? I've known about your operation since the day I arrived at FOB Warrior. I've been documenting your communications, your meetings, your financial arrangements with Taliban commanders, everything. Johnson's voice cracked as youth and inexperience made him the first to break completely. We're going to prison. Federal prison for treason, which carries certain penalties that I'm sure you're familiar with. The helicopter banked sharply as Park altered course toward FOB Warrior. But the return flight felt like a journey toward judgment rather than safety. Below them, the Kunar province spread out in darkness that now seemed to contain threats they couldn't identify or counter. Can you believe this incredible turn of events? Share this video right now, because everyone needs to see how real intelligence professionals operate. This ending will leave you speechless. 27 minutes later, FOB Warrior's landing pad blazed with floodlights that turned night into artificial day. Military police vehicles surrounded the helicopter before its rotors stopped spinning, their occupants deploying with efficiency that suggested preparation for high-priority arrests. Colonel Hayes stood at the edge of the landing zone with an expression that mixed professional disappointment with personal betrayal. Behind him, Rodriguez waited with communication equipment that would be needed for official documentation of everything that followed. As the helicopter's engines wound down, the Delta team sat in stunned silence, while MPs approached with restraint equipment and legal notifications that would begin their transformation from elite operators to federal prisoners. Their careers were over, their reputations destroyed, their futures measured in decades rather than years. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. A black SUV approached the landing zone with the purposeful movement that indicated arrival of personnel whose authority exceeded standard military hierarchy. The vehicle stopped precisely, and a woman emerged who bore remarkable resemblance to the communication specialists they thought they had eliminated. Colonel Sarah Mitchell walked across the tarmac with bearing that radiated command presence accumulated through operations that most people never knew existed. Her light brown hair caught the floodlights as she approached the helicopter, and her green eyes held depths that suggested experiences far beyond standard military service. She wore the same gray t-shirt and dark military pants that Sloan Mitchell had worn, but insignia on her collar identified her as senior field-grade officer, with security clearances that existed in classification levels most personnel never learned about. Gentlemen, she addressed the Delta team with voice they recognized, but authority they'd never heard before. I'm Colonel Sarah Mitchell, National Security Agency Cyber Command. Call sign Phantom Signal. For the past 6 months, I've been operating undercover at FOB Warrior to investigate intelligence leaks that threatened American personnel throughout this region. Donovan's pale eyes fixed on her with the desperate intensity of someone seeking escape from an impossible situation. You're supposed to be dead. We threw you out of the helicopter. You threw out my twin sister Sloane, who volunteered for this operation because she believed that stopping traitors was worth any personal risk. Her voice carried grief that made her words even more devastating. She died on impact, as you intended. But she died knowing that her sacrifice would ensure justice for the soldiers you endangered. The revelation struck them like physical blows. They hadn't killed their target. They'd killed an innocent woman, whose only crime was resembling someone who threatened their criminal enterprise. Thompson's massive frame seemed to shrink as the implications settled over him. We killed the wrong person. You killed exactly who you intended to kill. You just didn't understand who she really was. Patterson's technical mind processed the operational complexity they'd never suspected. How long have you been planning this? Since the day we identified you as the source of intelligence leaks. Since we realized that direct confrontation would only drive your operation deeper underground. Since we determined that the only way to gather sufficient evidence for prosecution was to make you believe you'd eliminated the threat to your activities. Coleman's whisper revealed understanding that came too late to matter. The whole thing was entrapment. The whole thing was justice. My sister died to ensure that your operation was exposed and that no other American soldiers would die from intelligence you sold to our enemies. Johnson's youth made him the most desperate in seeking some form of mitigation. We didn't know she was innocent. We thought she was the security threat. Colonel Mitchell's response carried finality that ended all negotiation. Ignorance isn't a defense for treason, and killing innocent people doesn't become acceptable because you made incorrect assumptions about who they were. As military police processed the Delta team for transport to confinement facilities, Colonel Mitchell stood in the floodlight-illuminated darkness of FOB Warrior and felt the weight of victory achieved through sacrifice that should never have been necessary. The criminal conspiracy was exposed, documented, and prosecuted with efficiency that reflected months of careful planning. All 5 Delta Force operators faced federal charges that would result in life sentences or execution, depending on military tribunal findings. The intelligence leak that had threatened American forces throughout the region was permanently closed. But the investigation revealed connections to similar operations at 4 other forward operating bases, suggesting a criminal network that extended far beyond the Kunar province. Colonel Mitchell's next assignment would take her to locations where other American soldiers were selling their comrades' lives for profit. As she prepared to leave FOB Warrior, Colonel Mitchell placed a single photograph on Sloane's empty workstation. The image showed twin sisters in civilian clothes, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling with the easy affection of siblings who'd chosen dangerous careers because they believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The satisfaction of justice completed transformed into something deeper and more personal. Sarah Mitchell had lost the only family she'd ever known. But Sloane's sacrifice had saved countless American lives and eliminated traitors who would have continued selling death to anyone willing to pay their price. Rodriguez approached the workstation where Colonel Mitchell stood, carrying equipment that had belonged to someone he'd known as a friend and colleague. "Ma'am, what happens now?" Her response carried implications that extended far beyond tonight's resolution. Now we find the others because traitors like to think they're unique, but betrayal follows patterns that skilled investigators can identify. As the black SUV carrying Colonel Mitchell disappeared into the Afghan night, her final transmission echoed through communication systems across FOB Warrior, carrying a message that would be remembered by everyone who heard it. Some missions require the ultimate sacrifice, but the best missions ensure that sacrifice saves lives rather than taking them. Phantom signal going dark. The Kunar province returned to its ancient silence, but the echoes of that night would resonate through military installations worldwide. Traitors learned that betrayal carried consequences that extended beyond their ability to predict or control. Patriots understood that justice sometimes required patience, planning, and sacrifices that honor demanded, but hearts dreaded. And somewhere in the darkness, other Colonel Sarah Mitchells were preparing for missions where the only way to catch predators was to let them believe they were hunting prey. Until the moment when hunters became hunted, and justice finally found its voice in the static field frequencies where truth and lies battled for supremacy in the invisible war that never ended. Some soldiers fight battles that history records in books and memorials. Others fight battles that exist only in classified files, and the quiet knowledge that they prevented disasters that never happened because of their willingness to sacrifice everything for people who would never know their names. Both kinds of service matter. In the shadows of betrayal and sacrifice, the story of Colonel Sarah Mitchell and her twin sister Sloan teaches us a profound life lesson. True loyalty demands the courage to confront evil, even at the ultimate cost, and justice, though delayed, always finds its voice in the darkness. Imagine the heart-wrenching pain of losing your only family member. Sloan, an innocent woman thrown from a helicopter at 8,000 feet, her life extinguished not by accident, but by the greed of those sworn to protect. Yet, her death was no vain tragedy. It was a calculated spark that ignited the exposure of treasonous Delta Force operators selling secrets to the enemy, endangering countless lives for personal gain. This tale reminds us that in our own lives, we often face smaller but no less significant crossroads, where speaking truth to power means risking relationships, careers, or safety. Sloan's unwavering belief in justice, volunteering for a mission knowing the peril, evokes the raw emotion of selfless love, the kind that echoes in every parent's sacrifice, every friend's unwavering support, or every whistleblower's defiant stand. It stirs the soul, doesn't it? That quiet heroism in the face of overwhelming odds, proving that integrity isn't about survival, but about leaving a legacy that saves others. In a world rife with hidden deceptions, corporate scandals, personal betrayals, or societal injustices, this story urges us to be the phantom signal in our own lives, vigilant, prepared, and unyielding. Let it inspire you to examine your choices, to honor those who've fallen so we might rise. If this moved you as deeply as it did me, hit that like button to spread the message. Subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and challenge the mind. And drop a comment below. What's one act of courage you've witnessed or taken that changed everything? Your stories keep the conversation alive.